Grant Robertson.
Mr. Chair, I rise to speak on part 3 of the bill, but as the Minister and the Chair has introduced the question of electoral defeat, I thought we could traverse perhaps the Minister's career, which has been an illustrious one of defeat, beginning, I think, with losing the Mana seat to Graham Kelly. Would that be right, or was it Winnie Laban? Was Winnie Laban.
Winning.
Well, it was Winnie Laban. I'd kind of been hoping it was Graham Kelly, because I do see a future for the Minister of the Chair as the High Commissioner in Ottawa, which is where Graham Kelly ended up. That's right. There are a number of places that he could be sent, and that would be possible. But out in Rongotai, I can tell you, Mr. Chair, that out in Rongotai, they're looking for the Attorney General out in Rongotai because they can't find him. Here in the Labour caucus, we just all wish and hope that Mr. Finlayson will run against us in the next election. That's what we all wish. If he's stumped up in Wellington Central, he's lived in the seat for years and years, but too scared to run in Wellington Central. Merely responding to the Minister's comments, Mr. Chair.
To debate part 3.
Very good. In part 3, which would have been nice if the Minister had stuck to it as well, we're debating the question of the amendments to the Intelligence and Security Committee Act. On this part of the bill, Mr. Chair, it would be fair to say, unlike part 2, the opposition, we could see in part 2 the improvements that the government had attempted to make. They didn't go far enough, but we could see them. In part 3, the effort doesn't even get there. It's a token effort to do something about an Intelligence and Security Committee that has not, under the leadership of John Key, provided the kind of oversight that we believe should be in place. We also believe that by legislation, this is exactly the kind of legislation that should be part of an overall review of our intelligence agencies. Because when this legislation was brought in 1996, this was deemed to be the appropriate structure for the committee. So minor tinkering takes place in part 3, but the basic structure of the committee remains, and the basic problems with the committee remain. And that was never better exemplified when the committee was hearing this bill. And the leader of the Labour Party, David Shearer, made the not unreasonable suggestion that some of the agencies for whom now, under this bill, it will be possible and legal for the GCSB to assist, might like to come to the committee and describe to the committee the kind of actions and activities that the GCSB would be working with them on, how they worked with them, what the relationships would be. That's at the heart of part 1 that's already been passed through the House today. So that's what the committee, David Shearer, sought the committee to do. John Key ruled that out. He ruled that out straight away as the chair of the committee. And Dr Norman and David Shearer, as the 2 opposition members on the committee, were trying to have the committee undertake a proper analysis of this bill, and they weren't able to do that because the Prime Minister and the Chair, assisted by Mr Ryle and John Banks, were able to stop that from happening. And Mr Chair, that to us highlights the shortcomings of the Intelligence and Security Committee that are not corrected by the amendments that stand in part 3. Mr Chair, we can look around the world and find other examples of the way Intelligence and Security Committees are composed and the way that they go about their business, which we believe should be seriously considered in terms of the New Zealand model and should be part of part 3 today. And if we can look only across the ditch, where in Australia they had 2 large-scale reviews of their intelligence agencies. They did that because the Australian agencies were struggling in a number of areas. What that led to was a parliamentary oversight that was significantly enhanced. But I want to pick up one particular aspect of the Australian Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, and that is that ministers, the Speaker and the President of the Senate are not able to be members of that committee. And that is a very significant difference from the Intelligence and Security Committee that we're looking at today. It makes it Parliament's committee. Now, it's quite clear this is a statutory committee that we're amending here in part 3. The Act is a statutory committee. It's separate from the select committee process. But by making those changes that the Australians did to not have the ministers in place in that role is a very significant change. Now, I'm not yet ready to say that's absolutely what I think should happen in New Zealand, but I do believe that it should be on the table in any review. As we said in my call, Mr. Chair,
Robertson.
as I said in my call earlier in part 2, I personally believe we do need the Inspector General to be an officer of Parliament, and we certainly need to enhance the Intelligence and Security Committee in terms of its role as representative of this Parliament. So the Australians have that matter. I'll return shortly to the question of the functions of the committee, which are in Clause 38 being amended here. But I want to reference one other country's Intelligence and Security Committee arrangements, and that's Norway, because that is another step again from where the Australians are. So the Australians are saying no ministers, and excluding the President of the Senate as well. What the Norwegians have done is created a Parliamentary Intelligence Oversight Committee which actually includes non-politicians. It's actually a committee that is to be made up of, and this is exactly what the Act says, should represent a wide range of experience, both political and from other walks of life. And it actually says that sitting members of the Parliament can't sit on the committee. Now, that is another step again from the question of whether or not you would have non-ministers on it. These are exactly the options, Mr. Chair, that should be on the table in a review which is contained in an SOP from David Shearer in this part as well. We need to look at a wider range of options. It may be possible to put the two together, to have a parliamentary oversight committee, but also have one that has the general public having some oversight. The Norwegian example is one where they can investigate a number of matters. They're restricted. Of course they're restricted in terms of the information that they can look at. But when you look at the purposes of the Norwegian committee, the very first one of those is to discover and prevent unjust treatment of any person. Surely that is the kind of oversight we would want. We would want to know that there were people looking over the actions of our intelligence agencies with a mind to avoiding unjust treatment. Imagine, Mr. Chair, if we had had that before the Kim.com saga, before we found out about the 88 illegal spying cases. So the Norwegians have a very open model. Again, I'm not saying that's necessarily the exact answer, but when we look at what the government is putting on the table in Part 3, it is woefully weak in improving the way in which the Intelligence and Security Committee works. Mr. Chair, when we return back to the functions of the committee, which is contained under Section 38 here, look, yes, it's an excellent idea to have the Inspector General of Security discuss his or her report, but when the committee is fundamentally set up the way it is, it's not going to be able to inquire into all of the matters that it should. Even the Australians have understood that. They slightly expanded the functions of their committee to make sure that they could review any matter in relation to the agencies that was referred to it. That's a wider brief than what we have in New Zealand, and obviously when the ministers are not in charge of the committee, that could lead to some quite substantive investigations. Mr. Chair, we do believe that the Intelligence and Security Committee has an important part in establishing that framework of trust that New Zealanders need to rebuild in our intelligence agencies. Where we are today is with trust and faith in our intelligence agencies at their lowest possible level. That falls at the feet of John Key and the national government, but it's also contributed to by the structures that are around our intelligence agencies. We haven't had a review of our intelligence agencies since 1976. That is far too long, and too much has changed in the world to complacently sit here in Part 3, tinker about with the Intelligence and Security Committee structure and say that's enough. The world has changed. The digital era has fundamentally changed the way we communicate with one another and in turn fundamentally changed the way that security and intelligence agencies work. The government must recognise that, have a review and look at the widest possible range of options for oversight. That includes a more independent Inspector General, and it includes re-looking at the way in which Parliament does its job on behalf of New Zealanders to look out for these intelligence and security agencies. The amendments in Part 3 are not even window dressing. They're just the minorest of tinkering to try and make the government look like it's doing something to make the Intelligence and Security Committee a stronger body. It does not do that. My colleague Mr Goff, I'm sure, will take a call shortly, and I know that one of the things, and I'll leave him to talk about this in detail, I'm sure one of the things he will raise is the question of who should chair the Intelligence and Security Committee. because there are some ideas out there that having a government member as the chair of that committee effectively leads us to where we've ended up. New Zealanders need to re-establish trust. This doesn't do it.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise on behalf of the Green Party to speak to Part 3 of this bill, which is in